and welcome to the Love How Deep podcast with Brian and Heather Mayer. Our purpose is to equip married couples like you with resources that rely on the transformative power of God's Word to strengthen your relationship.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. Today we have a special guest with us. Her name is Heather Hetchler, and she's going to share some good information and maybe give us some good resources throughout our episode today. So Heather, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Brian and Heather, for having me on. I'm really excited to be here. So my name is Heather Hetchler, and I'm a seasoned stepmom coach and certified mindset coach. And so what I've been doing for over the past 15 years is working with step couples and stepmoms to really educate, empower, and encourage them on the journey. Blended families make up about 50% of families in America, but we don't really talk about it. And we don't really talk about the dynamics and the impact that they have on the relationship. So you might be listening and thinking, well, we're not a remarried couple with kids, but I can guarantee you that you might know someone who is. So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about kind of what is at the foundation of a remarriage with kids. And while it's primarily applicable to step couples, I think any married couple will glean some really good information from what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, that's great. And on our podcast, we have not really broached this subject yet. So I think we're really looking forward to it. And if those of you that are listening, you know that Heather and I are part of a blended family. And so I think we're going to probably be listening along with everyone else to what you have to say today, Heather. So again, thank you so much for joining us. And you're going to, before the show, we talking about blended families and kind of getting specific about something around grief, I think is really what you want to talk about today. It's not a topic that I've really thought about much in all the years that we've talked about blended families, and that there being grief that's occurring really for everybody in the situation. So do you want to tell us a little bit more, I guess, about that topic just in general to get us kicked off?
Sure, I'd love to. So, when a remarried couple with kids gets married, they get married with hope and love and dreams for a really bright future. But it's important to note that that marriage could never happen without first a loss occurring. So there has to be a death, a divorce, or an unpartnering before a remarriage can occur. And where there's loss, there's grief, and there has to be grieving. And so often, the two individuals forming the couple may have done, counseling and healing from maybe the death of a spouse or a divorce or they're partnering, and they're excited, they've met someone, they're in love, they're ready to blend the families. But most likely those children haven't healed, and they may not even know what they need to heal from until the two families are combined and living under one roof or sharing or going back and forth. And so when couples marry and they become, one family, there's a lot that starts to happen. So there's this kind of rosy period prior to the wedding, and then you get married and it's just hard. It's hard for the couple, it's hard for the kids, it's hard for the grandparents, for the extended family. And the couple oftentimes starts to question, like, was this a mistake? Should we have done this? And it's not that they don't belong together. It's that they're not recognizing the role that grief is playing in their two families coming together.
I was just going to say that's exactly right. And I hate to admit this, but I don't know if I've ever told you this, but when I went through my divorce and started dating again, I mean, Heather came along several years later, but I really dated too soon. I remember one instance where I was with someone and I just started crying just for no reason at all and didn't really know what that was until I think I went home that night and reflected on it and realized that there was still grief. And I was really probably jumping back in a little bit too quickly. So, even not even thinking about getting remarried, but even just kind of, you can kind of go through that when you're dating too, I would say. did I ever tell you that?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think sometimes we don't even recognize the role that grief is playing, right? Because we associate grief with funerals, right? We associate grief with saying goodbye to someone, that we know, that we love. We associate love and hearts and balloons with weddings. But the reality is you only grieve what you once, loved, or a dream that you had. And so, when two people get married, they have expectations, even if, some are communicated and some aren't. And so when you blend a family, I mean, the step parent, whether it's the stepmom or the stepdad, they're not going to have immediate relationship and authority with those children.
Right.
And so they might get married thinking, I'm going to step in and I'm going to be this great mom or this great dad, but they don't have that relationship built. And that child many times is grieving the fact that, well, now I have two bedrooms. And now I have two sets of expectations. When I walk in daddy's house, I have to hang my book bag up on the hook. But when I walk in mommy's house, I can leave it on the floor. And now I have to have two holidays. And everyone tells me it's so great to get two Christmases, but I just want to wake up in one house and have one Christmas with one tree in both my parents. And grandparents sometimes then have to reschedule events because their son or daughter is co-parenting with an ex, and now they can't plan their holidays, or they can't do, what they'd like to do. And there's just all these little pieces, and you don't think of them as loss, but in reality they are.
Yeah, I definitely
And so that dream, yeah.
I definitely felt that loss. Like when we got married, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to have a child of my own because of health stuff that I had gone through. And so I knew that that was never going to happen. And that's something that I always wanted, was to be a mom. And so I was so excited to become a stepmom. And you're right. Like, we step into this thinking, I'm going to be a good mom to this child, or stepmom to this child, and help them make decisions and help them with homework. And we're going to do shopping together and cooking together, like all these things. And yeah, it's definitely that, just kind of an idea of what I thought was going to happen, and it didn't. So I grieved that I could not have my own child, and I grieved that the relationship that I had with her was not what would want it to be. So, I mean, I'm totally hearing what you're saying, and it's like, yep, yeah, that's pretty much how that went for us. And it was hard to come to terms with the fact that my motherhood did not look like what I thought it would ever look like, and to be able to accept that for what it was, that yeah, it's different, but different is okay. Yeah.
And Heather, you're wise, to that you were wise to come to that conclusion and to grieve that loss, because I think that it's one of the things that's important. Whatever you want or whatever your ideal is, that's important. And I see so many women comparing, like, is it right for me to want this? Is it right for me?
Yeah.
And I think we have to be honest about what we want and what our ideal marriage and family looks like, and then be able to find the beauty in what is. And I feel like we're kind of like there, I call it, I love going to London, and there's a saying called mind the gap, right? And so there's this gap between the platform and when you step on the train, and mind the gap so you don't fall in, right? And I feel like we kind of live between in that gap where here's my reality, here's what I want. And we need to be intentional to recognize that there's a gap most often between what is and what is hoped for. And if we can be intentional to navigate that gap and understand that why we might get triggered or why we get sad is because our expectations aren't being met, and grieve that, I think we're more able to kind of embrace what is there. And one of the things that's important to understand too is most relationships we get to kind of we put in what we kind of get out, and we can reach out and we can try and develop relationships. But in a step family, the stepchild is really in charge of the relationship. If a stepchild does not want to let you close, you are not going to get close. And I don't care how wonderful and loving and great you are, it it's not going to happen. And I think there's a lot of pressure on stepmoms in particular, but stepdads too, to create this like family, like I'll say a first family, but there's so many dynamics and loss present that it's going to look different. It's not better or worse, it's just going to look different. And being able to accept where you are and know that, like, even if you're not close to your stepchild today, doesn't mean you're not going to be close in a year or 5 years. And what I'm seeing now is a lot of step parents who were pretty close to their stepkids growing up, they turn 18 and they decide, I'm going to, I'm, I'm kind of pulling away from my family. And we're seeing it in the general population where adult children are kind of alienating from their parents. we're seeing it even more in the step family arena. And I personally think, just from talking to so many clients and interviewing people, is that so many of these children had no say in the divorce or death. And as an adult, they finally have some power, and they take it by taking space.
Yeah.
It's not a personal thing. It's more of like, okay, now I'm in charge. I can decide where I stay. I can decide who I live with. I can decide. All these decisions were made for me all this year. If I had to share a bedroom with a step sibling, if I had to change school systems, who I spent Christmas with, who I did this with, now I'm in charge. And many of them are just choosing to take space.
Brian, would you say she's done that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. We've
Is it-
had the same. Yeah. It's
Yep.
like you're talking to us for sure. And I think what I'm hearing you say, Heather, is you're saying a lot about, there's these going to be these behaviors on the outside and these things that we're seeing on the surface, and we can very quickly just get angered and upset and why are you doing this? But I think you've been talking a lot about, let's kind of dig down deep a little bit and understand a little bit more about why this might be happening. And again, it's a lot of it comes down to this being a loss.
Right.
And unfortunately, we all react to loss in different ways. Like, some of us get angry and sort of throw daggers, and others of us withdraw and, you know, isolate. So, and again, if we're just thinking about that surface level thing that somebody's doing, we can, kind of escalate disconnection, if you will, rather than taking a breath and a pause and thinking about, okay, what might be the reason that this is happening?
Mhm.
Yeah.
No, Brian, that's an excellent point. And I think that's actually, I believe that one of the first casualties in a blended family is compassion. So when you are, especially when the two adults are trying and trying and trying, and they feel like they're being kept at arm's length by a child, or maybe they have an ex in the other home who doesn't let the kids like them, or is maybe even spreading lies or gossiping or making life hard for them, it can become very easy to build up walls around your heart. And that can be to protect yourself from maybe how you feel like you're treated from your stepkids, the ex, but even sometimes your partner, because these complexities can cause a lot of conflict in the marriage because of differences of how we're seeing things. And so we start to build this protective wall to protect ourselves because we don't want to get hurt. But what we don't realize is that hurting people hurt people. And we can address all the little symptoms and the outward behaviors, but it really is wise to look underneath, to identify like the patterns of pain that I call them, and really try and be sympathetic. And especially for children and even adult children, they oftentimes don't know exactly what they're navigating. They just know that physically they feel stressed, they can't concentrate, they're angry. They don't like feeling that way. They want to get rid of it. And so sometimes they get rid of it by acting out, by, and by kind of spilling it out on other people. And so understanding and having some compassion, and then learning how to set boundaries. And because this information that we're sharing today, this explains a lot of behavior, it doesn't excuse it.
Right.
But that's where, when we could talk probably another time too about boundary setting and what that looks like in marriages and in step families, but being able to gently and gracefully advocate for yourself, because we also teach people how to treat us by what we accept. And so learning how to navigate that in a blended family can be even a more delicate dance.
So, do you have what kind of practical tips or steps can you share with the listeners to help them navigate step family issues?
Well, I think sometimes even just taking a step back and getting educated on the dynamics of step family life, because it can feel personal. And I always used to tell my stepmoms too, I say, you know what, you could be Beyonce and your stepkids could still be mean to you or not like you, because they might feel like you're taking time away from their dad. And even hearing an interview recently with Jennifer Lopez admitting that blended family life isn't easy. I'm like, okay, her stepkids have her as their stepmom. So it's the dynamics that we're navigating, right? So we have to think about the loss and think about, and so like, if you're, and I know we're talking all about the stepkids, but if they seem to be cranky, or it's hard when they come back from the other home, you know, maybe you just, like, this must be hard. Like, what if I lived between two homes and I had two different bosses? What if I went to two different workplaces and had two different bosses with two different sets of expectations? That'd be exhausting. I'd need some space to decompress. So maybe have that gray space. Or if it's difficult for you, sometimes if you're really wired, like you like a lot of order, that can be difficult in a step family. Maybe you just take a break, and especially if it's your stepkids, maybe you're just not home when they come back, or maybe you're upstairs in the bubble bath, or you're doing something, but you're giving them space to come back, and you're giving yourself some space. I think understanding that whatever happens in the other home impacts your home. So if the other parent doesn't like you and they make it known to their children, it's going to be really hard probably for those kids to accept you, because they're more concerned about keeping that other parent happy. And those loyalty binds are hard. And so understanding that whatever happens in the other home, it's going to end up in yours. And that's another loss. You don't have complete control over your home when you're in a blended family.
Right. That's true. Yeah.
Financial decisions in the other home affect yours, things that are said. It's,
Mhm.
um, understanding that you've got to prioritize your, self-care and couple care, like taking care of yourself, but also making sure that you nurture your marriage. And I think for the couple, and I think, when you get married in general, whether it's your first marriage or if it is a remarriage with kids, there is still some grief about you both come in with different expectations. You've both been raised probably in different homes. You've had different parents, different upbringings. You may have different expectations of how you have conflict or how you communicate. And you just might expect the other person to respond like maybe your dad did or your mom did. And when they're different, there can be some tension there. And understanding it's not right or wrong. You're just coming and you're learning how to navigate. But when you're coming in and learning how to navigate as a remarried couple bringing kids, whether it's one child or six kids, it's another layer of complexity that you're bringing into the marriage, and just recognizing that that there's going to be some difficulties, but learning how you can communicate and come back together. And I always say too, remind yourself your spouse is not your enemy. Even if you disagree on things with the kids or how to manage certain things, sometimes it can feel like, especially I'll hear from a lot of stepmoms, like, I just feel like if my husband really knew me or really loved me, he would never do this. Well, your husband can love you and know you and still do that.
Yeah.
Right.
And I especially see it with, if a step couple, remarried couple, has a high conflict ex in the other home. A lot of times the husband will maybe give her a little more time or give her a little more money, and the stepmom, that can be really hard for her. It's like, how come he seems to give in to her and stand strong with me? I'm like, well, he's probably giving in to her to save you from the drama that she will rain down if he doesn't. And so if we can flip our lens sometimes and take a step back, but sometimes we look at each other through this lens of hurt and this lens of protection. And so we're automatically going to see our spouse's behavior in a different light. But when we can take a step back and remind, like, this is the person I love. This person loves me. We love God. God made me worthy. He loves us. He wants this marriage to be fruitful and to last and to pour into each other. Then you're going to start to see your spouse in a different light. And so if you get stuck, because it's really easy to get stuck in these patterns when there's pain in the house, when there's the loss that's right there, but you're not really knowing that you're navigating the loss. And I see sometimes couples drifting into corners and kind of staking their ground, right? And
Yes.
God
Hmm.
doesn't want that, and we don't want that either. We love each other, but sometimes it can be easy to just take our put our, dig our feet in the sand and not move. And it takes one person to start to come back to center and to just be like, you know what, I love you more than any conflict we're ever going to have. I love these kids, and I want to make this work.
Yeah. And I was just thinking as you were talking, Heather, uh, what was I going to say? I just forgot. Oh, assuming positive intent. That's what I was going to say. I
Mhm.
think that's what I'm hearing you say, not to just blindly just accept that, oh, there's a good rational reason for this, but just to pause for a minute and think, you know what? I know my spouse loves me. I know they care about me, and I know they care about this family. So maybe there is a different reason that this is happening than that first initial sort of, you know, crazy thing that I'm thinking in my head as to what's happening, that they're against me. Just like you said, they're not against me. They're just trying to figure out and do the best thing that they can. And then the other thing I was thinking about, I once heard, I don't know if you've heard this as well, but blended families take about 7 years on average to gel together. And then I've even heard some people say sometimes it doesn't happen at all, and you just kind of just do the best that you can. And I think the reason I heard that is, or that someone told me that is just to say, you know what? Just be patient because we think automatically I'm going to get this figured out rather quickly. And it's not like the nuclear biological family where child is born and everybody's wonderful and amazing. It just doesn't work that way. So I don't know. Those were a couple things that I picked up there as you were talking.
No, absolutely. In fact, Ron Deal says in the Smart Step Families that it takes about 7 years on average for a step family to blend.
Hmm.
And also sometimes that you take the age that the child is when you remarry and double it, which is basically saying younger kids typically acclimate to a remarriage easier than an adult or a teen stepchild. I think that's probably the toughest time to remarry is when you've got teens or young adults.
Hmm.
So is that why
But
ours
what you
never
said,
seemed to acclimate?
Yeah, she was 8 when we married, and so that would be 16 years, right? So when she's 24 and out of the house, then she finally gets it.
But she's 27, and I just don't know if we're even there yet. But
That's okay.
all I can do is
and
look to
that's
God.
okay. I mean, I think that that's part of it. We have these ideals of what we want, but our families involve humans, and humans
Yeah.
are messy, and we're all a masterpiece of the maker, and we're all on his timeline. And so sometimes we
Right.
want things to come together quickly, but God is doing a work in all of us, and
Right.
he's the one that knows in what timing that's all going to come to fruition. But when you were talking, Brian, about the timeline, I've had a lot of, I'll call veteran step couples coming to me like, I feel like I kind of was sold a lie. Like, we've been working at this for 7, 8, 10 years, and it's getting harder. It's because it involves people and it's evolving, and we are seeing this increase of adult children walking away from their families, and we're seeing it more in step families. And so, um, I've seen where stepmoms full like have raised their stepkids, and then their kids get married and they don't even get invited to the wedding. Or I mean, there's just been such hard things, and that's one of the reasons I encourage too. And I love working with couples that are preparing to marry, so that I can kind of educate them on what to expect, so when it happens they know that it's not them, it's what's going on. But when you enter into a step family and you are parenting a stepchild, I always encourage, do it for the reason that you're a step parent. Do it for your spouse. Don't do it with an expectation that they're going to see you as this loving mother, or that you're going to have this amazing bond. That may or may not happen. But when we do things with expectation and the expectation doesn't come to fruition, it's even harder. But if I tell myself, you know what, I'm going to throw this birthday party because this is my husband's child and I love him and I love them and I want to give them a good party, and I end it with that. And if I get a thank you, that's great. But if I don't, that's okay too. I'm going to take my joy from the fact that I plan this to give this, from just the goodness of where I'm coming from, not with any expectation. Because when we start to measure our success as a step parent or as a step couple on whether our step kids like us, we're putting ourselves on this emotional roller coaster that's just going to go up and down and up and down. When we give for the sake of giving and we give because it's the right thing to do, nothing can change that. And so whether my stepchild thanks me or doesn't, it doesn't affect my experience because I'm doing for the sake of doing. Does that make sense?
It does. I think that, yeah, the expectations that we put on ourselves are so high, and we just want the best for everyone involved in the family. And you're right. Like if we could just say, okay, I'm going to do this for my stepchild because I love my spouse. And like you said, leave it at that. Like, man, so many, I'm just looking back like, oh my gosh, I wish so many times I would have done that. If someone would have told me that, like, Heather, stop putting these expectations out there. Just do it because you love them. And that's it. And then, for me, I was so hurt. I had to learn to forgive. And we talk a lot about like forgiving people. Like that is something I stand so strong on. Just true godly forgiveness. But yet I struggled with forgiving her and for forgiving myself through all of this time, for things, just missed moments for one reason or another, or not leaving the expectation out of it, but man, if we could do that and just say, no expectations, this is what I'm going to do. That, I'm going to do the best that I can, be the best stepmom that I can or stepdad that I can, and I'm going to accept whatever happens and know that I've done it to the best of my ability or to the best of my intentions. Yeah, I think it could just, I feel like that could just take so much hurt out of what we do to ourselves and then to our children and our spouses. Cause it's like, why couldn't you make her or him listen? Or yeah, yeah. It just makes so much sense. I wish I'd known you so many years ago.
Well, I always say I got my bachelor's in communications, my master's in communications research, and my PhD in the School of Step Family Hard Knocks.
Oh yeah.
So a lot of this is learning.
Right.
And the one thing that I want to share is that, we could probably talk for hours, and I know that that would not be something that your listeners would want, but I'll say one of the light bulb moments, and I credit my husband on this, and this was probably about 5 or 6 years into the marriage. We just there was one kind of pain point that was just really difficult. We just did not see eye to eye on, and we loved each other. We wanted to work together. When it worked, it was awesome. But when we didn't agree on this one thing, it just wasn't. And he called me into his office one day and he's like, I think I figured some things out. And I am the relational coach, and I'm thinking, okay, you're a chemist, but I'll listen to you. And he's like, Heather, I know you love my child. I know that. I don't doubt it. He's like, but I think that there is two different lenses. He's like, I look at her through the lens of unconditional love and grace, like God looks at us.
Mhm.
And you look at her through the lens of responsibility. If we don't fix this behavior, something bad is going to happen to her. And so when we look at her choices, we see two different things.
Yeah.
But we both love and we both care, but our role colors our lens. And so I'm much more forgiving. Let's see what happens. It'll work out. She didn't mean to do it. And you're like, we need to get in front of this if we don't correct it, if we don't set boundaries. And
Mhm.
when he first said, I know you love her, that melted me. Like, you do know I care. Because
Yeah.
everything I was doing was coming from a pure place of love. But it was kind of like and I haven't even heard the whole song, but I would think of that Miley Cyrus Wrecking Ball song. Like, I came in like a wrecking ball. Like, I just had such high hopes and love that I thought, I was a single mom for a while. I'm like, I'm going to come in and I'm going to like love and mother on everybody, and it's just going to be great. But the kind of, she didn't need that from me in that moment. And I had to learn to take a step back. And when he acknowledged that I had a pure love and good intentions, and it enabled me to actually step back and say, I don't always agree with how you're managing things, but I'm not going to interfere anymore. And I think understanding that the role you play can impact the view you see is really important for step couples to understand, especially when they're disagreeing over a child.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly, you described, Heather, exactly what happened to us. It was the same situation. And, I looked at Heather. She kind of came into the situation and I thought she was all about the rules and no relationship. But she said, no, rules and relationship go together. And then she looked at me and it was kind of like, you're all relationship and no rules. And we just kind of constantly got tangled up with each
We
other.
did.
And one thing, I know we're not really discussing it a whole lot here, but one thing that helped us was looking at our childhoods, and that played a part
Yes.
in why we parented. I mean, it was very complicated, but what, your father was in the military, right?
In the military, in the ministry, and
Yeah,
it
he was
was
a
all,
pastor.
yep, it was all rules.
Yeah.
I do have a very good relationship with my parents, but there were a lot of rules and expectations and responsibility growing up. And so I felt like she needed those things too. She needs to have, all of these boundaries and have some chores she's responsible for, whatever. And Brian,
Yeah, and so
how are
I grew
you?
up. I grew up in a divorced home myself, and so my parents just did the best they could, probably navigating their own mental health. And so a lot of times I was just sort of left on my own to figure things out and deal with things. And so that's again how I parented. But also you add in guilt over the divorce and
Uh-huh.
everything that I've put my daughter through already. I remember actually talking to her, I think when she was like a year old. I don't think she knew what I was saying, but I remember just kind of cradling her and I said, you know what? I'm never going to make you go through what I went through as a child. And unfortunately, I did. And so just an immense amount of guilt. But so again, just very complicated, a lot of layers for us,
Right.
no
Right.
doubt, including childhood, like I said, which I know we're not really
Yeah.
talking a whole lot about here, but
But it does
um,
play into how we parent our children. We often do it the same ways. And whether you're a blended family or not, that absolutely comes into play. We see that in the couples that we work with, and it's their first marriages, and their
mhm.
backgrounds come in, and you mesh it all together. And how do you make that work? How do you navigate all of that? So, yeah.
I think that's important. And I actually, just in working with couples and stepmoms for so long, I have one of my courses that I offer. It's called the Core Workout. And it walks each individual through their core values, attitudes, and beliefs. And so each person does it separately and they look at their childhood and, what did they value? What was valued in the home? How was communication handled? How was conflict handled? And then to be able to take a look and have that conversation with your spouse, because oftentimes it is your difference of your core values that come into play when you're having conflict or communication. It's how you were, raised. And even like why, like a lot of times, even in step couples that I'll work with, like for the stepmom, she gets really upset if she sees her husband being disrespected, like if she feels like he's like his kids are taking advantage of him or whatever. And so, maybe she grew up in a house where you did not disrespect your parents, you did not give an eye roll, you did not question your parents. But maybe he grew up in a house where it was loud and they talked with their hands and they said things to each other all the time, and it just kind of went, so he's not offended. And I'm like, if he's not offended, you can't be offended for him. Like, if he's not willing to address his child over the behavior she or he is showing to him, that's not for you. But understanding, okay, I am going to be triggered because that goes against my core value. And once I recognize that, I'm more able to sit with it and leave it with my husband, if that makes sense. And understanding why you can get triggered. It's not really the other person, it's some of the behaviors that are bringing you back to your past that, are really important to you. And understanding that, like, he's not going to care about that because for 30 years, he wasn't caring about that. Why should I expect him to care about it because he married me? And the same is true for, on the flip side as well.
Yeah, and we will put a link to the your course. It sounds like an awesome course in the show
Oh,
notes. And yeah, when we work with couples, I will sometimes, if somebody's really passionate about something that I think is touching on a core value, I might say something like, "Where did you learn that from?" And a lot of times that stops people because they think, "Well, it just is the way it is, and that's the way it should be." And well, no, you picked that up somewhere, and then we can have a nice dialogue about where that came from. But did we want to talk a little bit about, you have a really cool method, right?
Yeah, the
Uh,
4P method.
yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about your
Well, this is
4P
something that
method?
I like to teach. Yeah, thank you. The four P's is if you're feeling like if you feel like you're stuck in kind of, first we kind of work on identifying your pain patterns, but if you feel like you're stuck in something with your spouse or your stepkids where it just seems whenever this topic is brought up or you have to deal with something, it just doesn't go well. I like to encourage and walk people through the four P's, which is pause, pray, process, and proceed. And in the beginning, it takes a little bit of time, but pause just means just still yourself. Like,
Hmm.
you don't always owe something a response. If you feel yourself getting, I always say, don't make big decisions with big emotions. So if you're feeling yourself getting triggered, if you're feeling yourself getting upset, just pause and
Right.
then pray. Like, God, first, I just want to ask you to calm my soul. But second, I just pray for clarity. Why is this bothering me? What is going on? Why does this hurt me so much? Why every time my spouse says this or my stepchild rolls her eyes at me, why is it so painful? And then you sit and you process it, and you have to really, I call it the soul scrub. You've got to go deep. And you've got to be vulnerable to say, okay, you know what? This is because, maybe I was in a really bad relationship and I promised myself I'd never be lied to or manipulated again. And now I have an 8-year-old child lying and manipulating me. And it's triggering that.
Yeah.
And understand why. And then you choose to proceed. And sometimes that might be saying nothing. Maybe just the act of praying and processing something is the fruit. Maybe when you proceed, it's setting a boundary. Maybe, and that can look different. In fact, sometimes even in conversations, if you're having conflict, or you're having a conversation and you have maybe an adult stepchild, and they just, they yell at you, or they swear at you, or they're just mean, you can't stop them from doing that, but you can set a boundary to say, you know what, I love you, but when you speak to me this way, I'm not able to continue my part of the conversation. So just so you know, moving forward, if you yell at me or swear at me, I'm just going to end the conversation. I'm going to go in another room. I'm not leaving you, but I'm going to be leaving. And if that means like leaving the room, if that means I was making you dinner or getting ready to drive you to soccer practice, that's not going to happen. And then you have to be willing to carry out that boundary.
Yeah.
And in that situation, I've had stepmoms too, where they set the boundary and then they enforce the boundary, and then they hear their stepchild on the phone calling their dad. Dad, can you come home from work and take me? Because, and I say, stay the course. And typically dad will come home, and he'll come home the next time. But then after the third or fourth time of having to leave, he finally says, you need to be respectful to my wife. And sometimes even addressing our spouse as the spouse and not the step parent. So if there's a repeated disrespect, you can say, like, I want you to be nice to your stepmom or your stepdad. I want you to be nice to my wife or to my husband. And you kind of broach that with your child in the relationship you have with them, not the relationship they do. So like, this is my wife, you will respect her. But you have to learn to set those boundaries. So the 4 Ps are just something to remind yourself, pause in the moment, pray about it, process what's really going on. Because until you process and do that soul scrub and get down there and kind of unearth it and give it to God, it's not going to go away. And it's going to keep getting rubbed and touched. And then choose how you want to proceed. And like I said, sometimes it means you don't owe that person any response. You don't have to respond to every text you get or every note you get. You don't have to. And sometimes the best thing to do is not respond in the moment.
I love that. And I think that's an easy way to remember, because it is difficult in the moment when our emotions get the best of us, that that first thing is pause. And I think if we can do that one, then the rest of this is a little bit easier. That seems to be the most difficult one that I find for myself. I'll just, something will just come flowing out of my mouth because it's hit a pain point or punched a button in me. And, so yeah, I think if we can get that one down, we can, if we can pause, we can certainly pray, process, and proceed. At least that's my opinion. But I don't know, maybe different people have different issues with any of those areas.
Right. Yep.
That's great. So is there, I don't know, if we boil this down, is there something important that you want our listeners to make sure they're getting from our talk? I mean, maybe it is the 4 Ps, maybe it's something else.
I think especially for remarried couples with kids, understand it's not going to be easy. You have complexities and dynamics that are inherently challenging because of the loss at the foundation. And so it's not you or your spouse or that you married the wrong person. I want to encourage, your listeners to get informed about what is blended family life like. What are some of the things, like we talked about, how a stepchild really gets to determine, the relationship with a step parent. That's why a step parent can have, if they have like 4 or 5 stepkids, they can have 4 or 5 different relationships. Understanding that what happens in the other home impacts yours, and really anchoring yourself in your faith, and at always coming back to God, that God has you where he wants you, and to rely on him as the person that defines your worth. Because I think so often in a step couple, in a remarriage, we can start to attach our worth to how our stepkids see us, how our husband or wife views us, how the kind of external world sees us, right? How the school sees us or the extended family. But the reality is, the one that created us is the one that says we're wonderfully and beautifully made. And that's that vertical relationship that we need to be in touch with, and that we need to settle our soul with, is our relationship with God, and to go back to Him time and time again, to just kind of recalibrate, and to remember that our spouse is not our enemy. And if we start to feel like that, we really need to have a conversation with them and with God, and to remind ourselves that we are on a team. We are a step parent because we love someone with kids, and we're going to make it, and we're going to work through this, but we're going to understand these dynamics, and also to see that role that grief can play, especially if you've got children that are acting out or that are difficult in terms of just behaviors. So that was a lot. So
That's good. Thank you
That's so
for
good.
bringing God into this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because if you don't have God, I don't know how you do this life that we live in, regardless of what you face. Like, that's what we have both experienced so many times, where it's like God is who we're running to, and that's what's getting us through a lot of trials. So how has your faith in God impacted step families and what we're talking about today, and impacted you?
so I mean, my faith has always been an anchor. I think from a holistic, or kind of a big picture, one of the things that I see in step families, especially because one person, at least one person, a remarriage, has probably been married before and possibly divorced or had the loss of a spouse, and following after Christ, chasing God, and they meet someone and they fall in love, and this person, this is a good love. And so sometimes they can unconsciously take God off of the kind of the high ranking in their life and put this person up there.
Yes.
And then when you get married and you blend and life gets hard, and that person, maybe they don't make you feel the way they did when you were dating. It's like you can chase them and try and get that back from them. And it's really, God is always there for us. Like, we can lose, unfortunately, we can lose everything in this life. We can lose the people we love. We can lose our jobs. We can lose our marriages, but we can never lose God. And so if we can kind of reframe, and instead of chasing our stepkids to like us, or chasing our husband to see our point of view exactly, if we can learn to just sit in the embrace of Christ and rest in His word and His promises, I think it's ever changing. And I can remember, it was a few years in. I remember we were on vacation, and I got up early, and I walked to the beach. It was probably like 6 in the morning, and I was just sitting there, and I was struggling because some of the kids were going through some really hard times, and it was like, is it from the divorce? Is it from the wet? Is it from like the remarriage? Is it from like the other house? Like, what's, why is this so hard, God? Like, I love you, I believe in you. And I feel like He put this message on me. It actually opened my eyes, and I looked down, and there was this shell that I did not see when I sat there, and it was like two shells fused on each other. And in that moment, I just got this message, like, Heather, like, I am carrying you through this. I'm gonna preserve you, and preserve me. And I kept, it just was the word, like, I'm going to preserve you and your family. And I kept thinking, do you mean protect, like, and preserve? And I'd never really thought of the word preserve, except with my grandmother. We used to make preserves in the summer.
Yeah.
And I went back, yeah, I went back to the like condo we were staying in, and I've opened the book, or flipped, and I saw in Proverbs the word preserve. And then I started looking, and it just reminded me, God, when you are a Christian and you follow Christ, it does not guarantee that you are going to have blue skies and smooth sailings. But God can preserve your heart, and He has been faithful to preserve me, my marriage, my husband, and my children, to keep my heart soft. And we have, been through a lot with just not even like just other people and extended people and all that kind of stuff, but like, God has been faithful to preserve us, to keep our marriage strong, to preserve our hearts towards each other, to keep our children focused on Christ. Like, that is His promise to me, and He has been faithful. And so no matter what I navigate, and I give that message to, like, it might be hard in the now, but it's like Proverbs 3:5-6, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Acknowledge him in all your ways, and he will make your path straight. Like, I may not know why things are happening today, but I know where my forever is going to be. And I know who holds my days. And I think that's where we can, if we can slow ourselves down, that's where we can find peace.
Wow. I
I
think
love
that's yeah, that's
I
just
love that
amazing.
God has given you that, like, that little nugget, that message to hold on to, that word preserve, you know,
Yeah.
and that he's going to do that. And I love that you can carry that through no matter what you face. Like, yeah, that he's promised that to you. You know, he didn't
And
promise
he's
you
been
that you're going to,
faithful.
yeah, he didn't promise you, I'm going to give you a 5-bedroom home that costs $1 million. He didn't promise you that he's going to give you all of these children that adore you, but he promises to preserve you no matter what. And I love that you have that promise from him and that you rely on it with every single thing that comes your way. Like, that's there's just nothing better than that, I think. Yeah. I too have
Yeah.
my own like little God moments and promises that I'm like, I know he's going to take care of me.
I know.
I know he is. And we have these and we just hold them in our heart. And like, we know that's God.
Yeah. And it changes everything. And honestly, in the moment, I wasn't so happy about that word. I'm like, preserve. Like, I need you to like fix somebody. I need you to do something else. Like, this is not what I'm praying for. But actually, to go back to those 4 Ps. So when Brian was saying getting some time, like this was back when I was a younger mom and all the kids were home and it was hard to find a place to go. And I would actually go into my car. And when I was practicing those 4 Ps, I have a little pouch and it's still in there. And I have that shell in there. And I have 3 pictures, two of my husband and I on vacation, and a picture of our whole family. And I have some scripture cards. And I would go in there and I would open my me pouch, I would call it, and I would look at my shell and I would remind myself of God's promise. And I would read the scripture verses and I would look at the photos. And I would also eat a couple pieces of chocolate that I would keep stuck in there. And it would just allow me to pause and focus on what really mattered. You know, first things first, and that's God and marriage and family. And there's just something about that. And not my phone, not Instagram, like that stuff keeps you from really sitting with God, but like literally just sitting and being present in the moment and remembering that he is faithful and it is his timing, not mine.
Yeah. I love it.
That's
And I think that's
good.
probably a great place to end, right? I mean, we ended on a
Yep.
high note
I
here.
think so. Yeah.
And so yeah. So Heather, I know you mentioned your core workout earlier, but and if you want to talk a little bit about that again, or what other resources that you've got that might be helpful for our listeners.
Sure, I appreciate that. So they can go to reframingrelationships.com. That's my website. And on there, you can, I offer some personalized one-on-one coaching. I also offer small group mentoring programs for stepmoms, as well as a couple different digital courses like the core workout, how to sit with your feelings. I have another course called 10 Habits of Emotionally Healthy Stepmoms. And there's some other offerings as well. I'm kind of always offering different workshops. So if they follow me on Instagram, which is also Reframing Relationships, they can click on the link and sign up for my newsletter as well so that they can be the first to find out when I'm doing workshops or offering new courses. But I'm very committed to walking along step couples and primarily stepmoms and helping them get educated and encouraged on this journey, because I feel like the more we really know, the more that we can take things less personally and take it to God and really keep first things first, which is our marriage, our relationship with God, and being there for our family, but allowing God to do the work. It was good to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Yeah, Heather, this has been awesome. I really appreciate you joining us. And I know, yeah, I can almost imagine we would love to have you back. I mean,
I think so.
yeah, I think there were so many other little nuggets and stories and paths that we could have gone down that we didn't, that I'm sure we can go down because of all the amazing work that you've been doing. And thank you for what you are doing for remarriages and blended families and stepmoms and stepdads and stepkids and all of it. So.
Well, it's my honor, and it's an honor and a privilege to meet both of you and to share with you. And I'd love to come back sometime. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much.